Okay. So very much welcome to our webinar, which today is about from business jargon to academic writing. And we hope that at the end of the webinar, where's the arrow? That we will have shed a bit more information about what is the publication process and the differences in between the business and academic writing. And therefore, we offer also some further training that Rodrigo is running through the Doctorate Hub. We have the pleasure of having him here over in Porto next year for running a training, and also to have him online providing some training. And we also have, of course, our clubs, and one of the clubs is dedicated to publishing. And you will see that Jacqueline being and helping you through and providing you with further information. And with this, let me introduce our guest panelists. Well, first of all, I have the pleasure of doing the moderation today. I'm Dr. Andreas Meiszner, a co-founder and mentor with the Doctorate Hub. And then we have with us Mrs. Jacqueline Hiddlestone, who is a long timer with the Doctorate Hub. You will see her at almost each webinar. So if you have any question about the history and where to find stuff, go to her. She knows where to get stuff. And we have the honor to have Professor Dr. Rodrigo Lozano with us today. He is a newcomer to the Doctorate Hub. And with this, perhaps I first invite you, Rodrigo, to quickly introduce you. What's your background? 2, 3, 4 sentences. That would be very much welcome.
Thank you, Andreas. Well, I'm full professor of what we call organizational sustainability at the University of Yale. That means that we are analyzing, studying, reviewing, but also trying to help organizations of any type. It can be corporate, can be educational, can be hybrid organizations, to embed sustainability and contribute to sustainability. So we're looking at the internal part of the organization and the connecting to the external part. We've done that through, for example, technical issues, management, governance, employment, employee relations, governance, assessment and reporting, collaboration, and many other things.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Then Jacqueline, ball to you. Perhaps you want also to tell what's your relation to publishing and why are you running a club on that?
Why I'm getting involved with writing articles. I've been dealing with the BAM conference area as well, so both in the organisational change and the strategy as practice. So there's conference papers and then additional journal articles and reviewing. So find it interesting and keeps me out of trouble.
Okay, and for all not knowing what BAM stands for, it's what?
Sorry, British Academy of Management. It's probably one of the largest organisations in the UK, and we end up with around between 800 and 1,000 attendees each year.
Right. And are they back to the annual conference in person, or is it still online?
It was hybrid this year. They're again looking to try and make it face-to-face next year, but it's possible it will be a bit of a hybridisation again. But they're trending back towards face-to-face.
Okay, thank you. So let's dive into the topic. Rodrigo, hey, why is my screen not following me?
Yes, I forgot to mention that I've been an editor of different journals for the last maybe 10, 12 years, and I've edited somewhere around 10,000 manuscripts. So
only a couple, eh?
Yeah, just a few. And this is what I like to start when I'm doing my article writing workshop. So research is creating new knowledge, and that was Neil Armstrong that said it. And then Werner von Braun, a very well-known German scientist who ended up helping NASA to send the first man to the moon, said, research is what I'm doing when I don't know what I'm doing. So next slide, please.
All right.
What we're looking for in a paper, well, and that's something that I've been really pushing towards all the students to say, okay, it's not just about having your literature review, or not just about having your data and then analyzing your data. But what you want in a paper is to contribute to scientific knowledge. And scientific knowledge can be contributing to a new theory, developing a new method, proposing a new framework, a new model, etc., etc. And that has to have a very clear, useful, and exciting message. There's thousands, if not millions, of papers being published every year. And you want to make sure that your readers can really understand what you want to say. And it has to be constructed in a logical manner. And I'll present a very brief structure on that. And you need to ensure that the editor and the reviewers go through your papers very, very quickly. So when I was editor of the Journal of Clinical Production, we were getting more than 10,000 papers a year. I had maybe 5 minutes, 10-minute stops to check a paper, to realize and understand whether the paper had some sort of a contribution to knowledge, how it was it very well structured, was the English readable, and then being able to pass it to either one of my associate editors, or I would handle it myself. But as you see, it's 5-10 minutes for the editor, and the reviewers, maybe, if they're very experienced, they'll spend about an hour. If you're not experienced, maybe a couple of days reviewing your paper. But you've maybe spent 1 year, 2 years writing your paper. So you need to design that your paper that is very easy for the reviewers and the editor to grasp its significance. The next slide, please.
Yep.
Then you have to consider who is your audience. So some journals are very, very specialized, and some have multidisciplinary targets. Is it a general audience? And that's part of what Jacqueline might be telling you later on the general audience. And you need to adjust your information and writing accordingly. Different journals have different styles. Some of them prefer the active voice, some the passive voice. Some have very different ways of referencing, whether it's numbered, non-numbered, Harvard, APA 7, ASA 6, etc., etc. So you need to check what they're doing. And last but not least, is the readership worldwide or local? So if you're going to be writing a paper for the UK, you can take, for example, in the center of Leeds, blah, blah, blah. But for somebody who lives in China, they might not even know where Leeds is. They don't know what the center is made of, etc., etc. So just to give you a silly example. Next slide, please. This is your typical structure on your papers. I know some structures are different, but you have to have your title, your authors, abstract, keywords, and the main text. I divided into these sections: introduction, literature review, methods, results, and findings, depending on whether it's quantitative, qualitative, discussion and conclusions, and then the rest, your acknowledgement, references, and supplementary material. The main text really depends on the type of paper you're writing. Sometimes you have your introduction and your literature review together, sometimes your results and your discussion together, sometimes your discussion and conclusions together. If you come from the natural sciences, most probably you'll be using the IMRAD structure. That means introduction, methods, results, and discussion. If you're writing a conceptual paper, then you kind of stuck there in the introduction, literature review, and then the methods might be explicit, might be implicit, but it really depends. This is kind of the most typical structure. And I think that's the end of my slides for today, but I will be delving a lot deeper in our workshop in Porto in mid-January. I think it's 13, 14, 15, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that should be the dates that weekend.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So let's move into the discussion and let's move out of the presentation mode. Let me stop here the sharing. Good. So we have prepared a couple of questions. Nevertheless, if the audience has other questions or wants to ask on the go, you're very much welcome. As said, it's a very interactive format. And hello, Khalid, warm welcome to the webinar. Hello, Christian, also warm welcome. As said, if you have any questions, then you are very much welcome. Let me start with the first question that we outlined. So perhaps very roughly for the start, how is academic writing different to business writing? And what might people consider who are practitioners by heart and who are just used to business writing day in, day out? What are the do's and don'ts? Might I ask one of the two of you, Rodrigo, perhaps you first, afterwards, Jacqueline?
Thank you, Andreas. I think that's quite typical. So if you're used to writing reports, and you most probably will not use references. So the first thing that you'll see in academic papers is that you must use references, especially in your introduction, literature review, and then your discussion sections. You must use them. So on a paper with less than about 20 references, it's considered to be quite weak in that sense. I've seen papers with 50, sometimes even 300 references. But also most important is that you need to contribute to that scientific knowledge. And in order to contribute to that scientific knowledge, you must provide evidence and as much as transparency as you can to get to that conclusion. So if you say, well, the sky is red, you need to prove why that sky is red. So for example, Jacqueline has a orangey type of sky, and you need to prove why, why that is the case in a particular or a more general approach. So I would say those are kind of the two really big differences in that sense. Of course, the structure is also different in the report. Jacqueline, maybe you have some other opinions?
Yeah, I tend to find that with the business or corporate writing, it's really focused in delivering a key message. So it's you're looking at trying to convince the group or your stakeholders really of the difference in needs and the interests. So it's you're almost, I suppose, marketing in a way, that it's problem solving rather than solution rather than problem focused, where your academics are very problem focused. You're not, as you said, you're not using citations in a business writing. It's ultimately it's based on making things happen. Whereas your academic is obviously cited, it's scientific based, and it's looking at the actual problem identification and addressing that problem and contributing to knowledge. Over to you, Andreas.
Yeah, thank you. Back into the audience. Are there any follow-on questions on this?
So what I think one key, there's tricks here. One key aspect of academic writing is bring in critical thinking and letting your critical thinking show. You know, I'm fairly new to this compared to majority of you on the other side of the fence. I wondered if you can shed more light on how critical thinking is evident in your academic writing.
It really depends on the discipline that you're in. So for example, in management, that is very, very highly required. In mathematics, it's more of demonstrating. So it depends on the discipline and the epistemological position you are adopting. For example, as I said, in management, it must be explicit. So management, social sciences, it must be explicit on your conclusions. So when you just, as I said, you do an analysis of some statistical database, and then you say, well, that's it. They're going to tell you, but where is your critical thinking? What is it showing? How does that connect to the literature? How's that pushing the boundaries of knowledge further? So that's why I said you have to be explicit on your conclusions.
Jacques, any addition to that?
No, I think it's very well worded. I agree with you.
All right, Jacques, any further question that you might have?
Another one, I guess, is when I read the title From Business Jargon to Academic Writing, I can't help but think about my position as I work in consulting, and if I'm not being too cynical, majority of what we do is just talk a lot of big game to the client, and that involves a lot of jargon. So when I see that, I almost feel like it's directed at me, even though it's not. And so when I think of From Business Jargon to Academic Writing, my journey would be a fundamental shift in mindset. A lot of what Jacqueline said, which is you're not focused on the solution, you're not trying to present and market some information or your expertise. You're trying to, in a way, you're trying to market your intellectual capability of understanding the problem thoroughly and intimately, and kind of showing the original thinking you brought to the table. The part that I've heard all sorts of opinions about is what that original thinking looks like. And I wondered if anyone can shed a bit more light on what would impress someone like you, Rodrigo or Jacqueline or Andreas, as, you know, original thinking or you know, the right level of analysis that a paper should have, or some kind of research material should possess.
Original thinking, that's an interesting term. Jacqueline, this time first. What do you understand first of all? Once talking or listening to original thinking.
Yeah, original thinking, I really take it in as the approach of you're adding to the knowledge base. So what are you taking it to that next little step? It only needs to be a smidgen, but it's actually taking them the next step along. Quite often you're building on other people. You're not necessarily coming with something totally unique and new. That is unusual to have that. So quite often you are taking existing and you're adding to that knowledge. So you're adding the next layering on that. Any thoughts with that, Professor Rico?
I have to absolutely agree with you. I mean, original thinking is a term used mainly in the UK. But what I've seen in Europe, for example, is a contribution to scientific knowledge. Some people call it scientific contribution to a discipline, contribution to a community. But as Jacqueline said, it's adding to the canon of knowledge. Which canon of knowledge? Well, again, it depends. So if you're doing mathematics, you have to try out a new theorem, or you have to prove that it's wrong or prove that it's right. In management, are you adding to, for example, Porter's 5 forces? When I started my PhD, I had been working as a consultant for about a year and a half, 2 years, and it was for me a massive change of mindset, saying, look, I'm selling you my ideas, I'm selling you my solutions. And now I cannot really sell my solutions, but I have to find out what are the many different solutions that there are in the world and which one might be the better one. And then on top of that, how can I add to that one? So it's I would say the world upside down, if you want to put it like that. Or you can just say it's a different world. So when consulting, you want to sell something. Product, idea, system, yourself if you want to. But in academic writing, first you need to find out what all the people have said about that problem and what are the gaps, so what are the hypotheses you have to come up with, what are the frameworks that you might use and improve them.
So where in this process then do you go beyond, Rodrigo? You say, Jacqueline said, not unique, not new, means it must build on something that's already existing. What all the people said, what is known. So where do you show originality then? What is the element?
Well, Khalid is asking a question there. Is combining two disciplines or putting two disciplines together? Yes, that can be. Or can be, for example, using a different theory in a context that has never been done before, or developing a new method, developing a new theory, testing a new theory. So there's different options, and it really depends on the discipline that you're in. Let's say like mathematics, engineering, all the natural sciences, you take a much more positivistic approach where you try to test what we call grand theories. So you test them. But more on the social sciences, management and all that, you want to try out new theories and improve new theories. For example, if you take stakeholder theory, I don't know if you're familiar with that one, you have a company and you have some stakeholders. That was proposed in 1980 something or early 90s. And then how would you propose something new to that theory? Okay, I can apply it, but application is not valid enough with just a paper. But maybe, as it has been done before, maybe you can come out with a matrix of power and influence, or maybe you can expand it to materiality indices or things like that. So that's expanding the canon of knowledge.
Jacqueline, from your end, any further contributions or thoughts?
I agree with you, because you're actually taking existing and then adding to that. You're not necessarily, although there's independent thinking or I'm trying to think of the actual word you used, but you're actually adding layering to it. You're not necessarily starting with something from scratch. To start something from scratch, in effect, totally unique, is unusual.
Okay, Shucks, is that providing some useful feedback information?
Yeah, it does. No, it does. It also helps reiterate some of the things I've heard previously from Dr. Hobb. So yeah, it's useful to hear that. Thank you.
Okay. Rodrigo, you already pointed twice to the fact that it depends on the discipline you are talking about, mathematics or social sciences. You said if you talk about a mathematics article, you might not even have a literature review. Is that correct? So what?
In some cases, in mathematics and engineering, you have just an introduction. So this is the problem. That's how I'm going to be solving the problem. That's what we call the IMDRAD structure. Introduction, methods, analysis, results analysis, discussion. So you wouldn't really come out with a literature review because most of the principles, the theories are known to the community. So when you talk about physics, theory of gravity, you don't need to point out to Newton. You don't need to have a discussion on Newton. You say either Newton or Einstein. Simple. So in that sense, the community knows already all the theories that there are, and they just want to test them. So how do you test the theory of gravity in the moon versus the Earth? So I'm just exaggerating here a little bit. Or what Einstein did was that he proved that the theory of gravity was not all the time right, but in real life, 99% of the time is right. But if there are special considerations, then it doesn't really apply. So those type of things you'll be doing. So you don't really need to do a whole literature review because the theories are what you can call absolute. So they are absolutely tested, and therefore you're either trying it or doing a different theorem. Now, in social sciences, when you talk, for example, about the theory of the firm, which theory of the firm? Are you talking about the artificial theory of the firm, the aggregator theory of the firm, the stockholder, stakeholder, real theory of the firm? So then that's when you need to do your discussion and say, look, according to so-and-so, the theory of the firm includes that, but it's maybe not taking into consideration a resource-based view, or maybe it's not taking into consideration cultural differences that are based on religion, and therefore you'll be adding to the canon of knowledge. But many of your writers might not know about these theories, and therefore they are also not absolute, and therefore you need to do your discussion and your literature review to show the reader that you know where you're starting. As Jacqueline said, you need to have a base for that.
All right. Jacqueline, any thoughts on that before I come perhaps with a related question?
I think go to your related question, thanks.
Okay, then let me place a related question to you, Jack. Yeah, I mean, if there is no such thing as absolutely tested, how do you know how much context information you need to provide? It means how much back do you need to go? How much do you need to discuss to just get into the series on which your work would be building? And what's the trickiness there on how to find that out?
Are you talking in relation to a thesis, or you're talking in relation to a journal article?
Is there a difference? If so, then please.
Can be, yes. A thesis typically is anywhere between 50 and 120,000 words. So a journal article is between 3 and about 7. So there's a notable difference. The journal article, and as Professor Rodrigo will say, you need to be concise, but very clear in exactly the approach you're taking. You need enough for the reader to understand exactly what you're talking about, but not too much to be too wordy. Where a thesis, you're going into the detail, you're proving the what, the so what, and the now what. You actually take them right through the process and your thinking. So there's a distinct difference in the approaches you're taking.
So
thoughts on that?
It's a bit like if you're living in Southern Europe and you ask for a good steak, there's a bit of fat on it. Just right.
No, yeah. Proper steak, really well cooked, dead, right. No mooing. Yes.
And then you go up to Germany into a restaurant and you will see no fat at all, just clean cut. So how do you deal with such cultural differences, in particular if you're publishing in English in an international environment? Any of the two of you?
Okay.
let me just add something on Jacqueline's point on the one of the differences between articles and a thesis, a monograph, what we call in the UK. In an article, your epistemology is usually implied. Epistemology or on ontology, depending on which position you have, and of course which discipline you're in, it's implied. So you don't tell the reader, my epistemology is critical realism because blah, 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 blah. No, it's implied. And then the reader needs to know, if they're clever enough and educated enough, where are you standing? in your master thesis, PhD thesis, you must explicitly state, at least in the UK, what is your epistemology? Why have you taken that one and not another one? So you need to explain why have you taken critical realism instead of pragmatism. Now, if it's positivistic, you don't usually put it in there. Again, going back to the absolute theories. So that makes it another difference. And in a monograph, as Jack said, you have a lot more space and time to really explain into detail definitions. Or, for example, I work on sustainable development. In a thesis, you can explain what's the difference between sustainable development and sustainability in 3 pages. In an article, maybe you leave it in a footnote.
We got a question from the audience. Contribution to knowledge, finding a knowledge gap. Does that mean that the possibilities of expanding knowledge in a particular field is inexhaustible?
Yes and no.
Yes
I'd say
no.
yes, but pretty much yes. But at what point in time do you stop adding knowledge? You know, I take the approach, if you stop learning, you die. So you're always adding to knowledge.
Sometimes one little piece of on top of the cake, and sometimes you add a whole layer on top of the cake. Sometimes you think you've added the cherry, but maybe you need another cherry, and then somebody else comes out with a cleverer or more clever idea on how to improve to that canon of knowledge. So that's why we have Einstein and Marie Curie and people who they were used to that, and they said, no, we need a new set of laws or a new set of theories that go beyond what has been discussed for a long time.
All right. So coming back, what is the role of language and expression in writing? Going back to the piece of meat, lots of fat, not so much. How do we argue? How do you get your way through? How do you learn that? How do you get to learn that skill?
But how do you learn that skill? You do it. Well, academic writing, that's very formal. You're using third person and using this passive voice all the time. Although DBA, because you're scholar practitioner, quite often they can be first person. Because you're trying to take the approach, you're trying to persuade, I suppose, your supervisor or examiner or the journal reader, you're focusing around the problem, identifying the problem, your methodology adopted, those type of things. Academic writing can fall into things such as your an essay, a research paper, your thesis, literature review, conference paper, journal paper. So you've got all those variabilities. And most of the standard format, as Professor Rodrigo outlined, you've got your introduction, your literature review, methodology, analysis, and conclusion, and citation all the way through. But with, say, for example, your business writing, it's a lot less formal. It's more direct. It's more concise. Using my hands again, sorry. Using quite an active voice. So your writing's really focused on achieving a specific goal. So you're dealing with, I suppose, a job task. You're dealing with stakeholders and using that language that the audience want to understand. So yeah, be it a business case, a board report, procedures. So they're all different angles when it comes to business writing. So your language will vary based on that. So a policy will be very structured, where, say, a procedure, what step goes through, where you're coming into. So again, that language is slightly different. So business writing is really, it's got a purpose. So you want to make key points, you want to get that, support the points with all the relevant information, but you're really persuading, or tends to, I suppose, a lot, particularly say board report, gives you a call to action. So they are distinctly different between the academic and the business writing. Any other thoughts on that, Professor?
Yes, thanks. Just call me Rodrigo, otherwise I feel really old.
Sorry, mate. Rodrigo, how's that?
Yeah, much better. Academic writing has what I would say 2 boring parts. One is that it's very linear. So you start with your introduction, literature review, methods, results, discussion, conclusions. Extremely linear and extremely predictable. But at the same time, it has a purpose for that. And now when you go into the nitty-gritty and the sentence construction, again, I would strongly suggest that you use the traditional English or any other language structure, that you start with a noun, verb, direct object, indirect object, and anything else that you want to add on that. It's the same in German. So you start with the noun, verb, direct object, indirect object, and locative, and all of those things. That makes your life a lot easier. On top of that, you really need to keep your opinion to yourself. So it's not what you think, but it's what the evidence shows you. So in business writing or in poetry, you can go around and you can come back to the start and you can do this. And for example, take Les Miserables, not a very company right, but it's a poetic, it's a novel, an extremely poetic novel, I would call it. But you start in one point, then you go back to point B, and then you may go to point F and then come back to point A. And you don't do that in academic writing. You go A, B, C, D, E. So the Germans are very good at getting 1, 2, 3 in that sense. And it's, I would say, boring, and avoid anything saying unfortunately or fortunately or no or surprisingly. Well, the outcome might be surprising for you, but not for all the readers. So those type of opinion words, I forgot what's the right term for them, you need to avoid them. You have to say the experiment showed that blah, 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 or the analysis indicated that there is a potential conflict between two stakeholders. So those type of direct sentences, boring sentences, very highly structured in it, I would say more traditional formal English or German or whatever language you're working on.
Okay. So what the evidence shows, no opinionations. That are two key messages I got out.
Except when it's your contribution to knowledge, but it's not just your opinion, it's your informed opinion.
So opinion, yes, but informed opinion based on the data analyzed.
And the evidence that you have collected from the literature review.
So, and that is the difference to mathematics, where you can conclude 1 + 1 is 2.
Yeah.
No, 6.
And you end with QED, quid est demonstratum. But in social sciences, you can't do that.
Okay. You talked already about initially, Rodrigo, 1 year to finish a paper. We sometimes have students in that ask, can I write that thesis in 4 months? To which the quite obvious answer is no.
I'd say that's kind of an average. So a paper, a year for a paper, yeah, kind of okay. You can reduce that depending on a number of factors. The quickest paper I wrote was from the moment that I started analyzing the data to the moment I finished the paper was 2 weeks, because I already had the things in my head and I already knew what I wanted to do. So it was very, very quick and very straightforward, that paper. The longest one took me 7 years to write. So there's a huge variation. 1 year, yeah, okay. 2 years, all still okay. 4 months for a thesis. Which type of thesis?
I've seen a master's thesis in 4 months, and I've given feedback, and I'm sorry, this sentence structure was not there, the flow wasn't there. It was just obviously a brain dump and go, your problem now, you're the supervisor. Well, kind of, mate, no. Write the structure and go through the process. To go all the way through the entire process, it's not possible to do it in 4 months.
So where do you invest all of that time? What is it that takes how much time? If you would need, do you have that checklist? Here a week, there a week. What, Jacqueline? How do you?
I think it also depends, because, for example, I mean, a PhD goes from 3 years to about 6, 8 years. And yeah, or let's say that you spend the first 2.5 years collecting data in the Galapagos. I had a colleague in Lisa, she was collecting data in the Galapagos. And then you spend the last 6 years just writing up your data, and it's not a social science type of research. So it's just more or less describing what you did and what did you find out, and not a lot of informed opinion in that sense. So yeah, you can write those things for 6 months. But that means that you've already had to have your reports, your data collected and pre-analyzed in a way that 3.5 years before that, 2.5 years before. So just the process of writing by the sake of writing, yeah, you could do it in 3 months, but that means that you have to have done a lot more work prior to that.
Okay, and Khalid, I'm seeing your question. It will come up soon. Let me just still focus on the time frame, just to get a bit perspective in here. So if Rodrigo just said quickest paper in 2 weeks, then as I get it, that's not because you have been extremely productive in those 2 weeks, but it's because you could make a lot of use of what you had already at hand. Is that correct, that understanding? Or?
Because I knew the literature very well, and I knew exactly what I was looking for. So it was pretty much, it was an analysis of sustainability reports of 12 universities. So I had the method that I had developed previously in another paper, downloaded the documents, checked them against the tool, and I already know the literature. So it was about, okay, collecting the things that were there, writing the introduction. I already knew what was it about, and by when you're analyzing the documents, you're already realizing what is the key message. But that was absolutely crazy to do that in 2 months. So a normal paper for me, where I would have to, for example, develop interview questions or survey, just developing the survey takes you about 3 months, 4 months, and then you need to open it for another 3 months to 4 months, and then you need to analyze the data. So you're talking about 9 months for that, to a year. Same with interview, with qualitative interviews. You need to spend 2 or 3 months developing them, and then you need to get the access, you need to do the interviews, then you need to analyze them. So realistically and traditionally, about a year and a half to a paper, that's kind of normal.
Okay. Jenny, earlier, no, let's now come first to that question from the audience before I forget that. So what about writing style in academic writing? Jacqueline, to you.
Writing style. Well, academic writing is a lot more formal. Where business, you as I said earlier, it's probably third person, a passive voice. Unless it's DBA, then it can be first person. Definitely a lot more formal. You're utilizing citations and everything coming through, where your business writing is a lot more informal. It's call to action. It's very concise. It's almost, with the business paper, you can almost do your dot points and then expand out the paragraphs and keep it into 1, 2, 3 pages, whatever it needs to be. Where academic, as Rodrigo said, it's that time, that thinking, that takes a lot of time. And then it's going, once you just free form writing, then go through the editing, it's having a look at what your language is. Is it the appropriate language? Is your sentence structure suitable for the journal you're actually targeting? So there's quite a different process in between the two. I don't know if I've answered your question or not. You might have to ask it again.
Is the question answered? Or? And Rodrigo, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that Jacqueline had it pretty well. I was unsure whether he was referring to the writer styles, so as in Victor Hugo against Ernest Hemingway or things like that. It's rather, I would say, nuanced in academic writing. So yes, you might find out who the writer is, but it's a lot more difficult to say, okay, this was written by Victor Hugo than by Shakespeare and things like that. Of course, you kind of have schools of thought, and then some people tend to write in a similar way, but it's just really those nuances. Whereas Shakespeare versus Victor Hugo, it's a lot more clear in that sense. So I don't know if the question goes on that side, or if it's just about the writing style, as Jacqueline answered.
Rodrigo, you open here, by the way, a very new door of line of thought that I hadn't associated with that question beforehand, but you already pointed out that there's a huge difference in between mathematics and social sciences, but now even within the social sciences, it's not like they all speak the very same language, right? I mean, if you have a computer scientist who publishes about some social science stuff, you would see terms like problem domain, which other people from the management school perhaps would not even know what that is.
And some colleagues I know from different universities, they tend to write in very thick writing. So sometimes you have to read the same paragraphs 3 times in order to understand what is it that they're trying to do. And that is a way that I don't like, particularly personally, because then the language becomes a tool to exclude people from science. So I put a lot of jargon, a lot of technical terms, a lot of things that excludes you from that. You don't know the terms, you don't know how to get through that the particular way of writing, then you will not understand the paper. I tend to write more on it doesn't matter whether the context, the theory is very complex. I want to write it in a way that anybody could understand it. So,
Okay.
yeah. But going back to, yes, if somebody comes from mathematics, they will write in a particular way, but also, for example, in economics, if you're a neoliberal economist, you'll be writing in different terms and different way than somebody from environmental economics.
That's where the benefit of ensuring you write definitions at the beginning of your paper. If you've got key terms, ensure you weave those in first time they come up. The number of papers I read through that you're going, what the hell are they talking about? And a clear definition would have made such a difference at the beginning. So definitely add those in.
That means that each paper is made to a particular reading group or group of journals. And if you consider afterwards submitting it to a very different type of journals, then you would need to
change your language.
We'll translate it, yes.
Yeah, definitely, because you find if you're putting through to one journal, and if you anytime you go to a journal, and Rodrigo made mention of it, if the journal you intend submitting to, have a look at, there's an author section, and have a look at what it's actually asking you. Read some of their articles. That gives you an indication of the language they use, the flow. Are they qualitative or quantitative based? Are they literature review based? If you understand which journal you're going to go for, then reading a number of articles, you get an understanding of what the language is about. And if you can get the flow on that right, then you've got more chance of actually being accepted to that journal. And you know what the quality and the standard you need to write to.
Okay. Now I had a question for which you now gave me partly the answer already, but let me.
Sorry.
No. Yes, of course, and no reason to be sorry here. Jenny said earlier in her viva she was encouraged to use some of her findings to afterwards turn it into a publication. Now, which type of learnings do you still need at that point in time? What type of training? I mean, you've just finished the entire thesis, you did it. Now a paper is sort of replicating with less words what you have been doing in your thesis. Now we just got the answer, okay, you need to know what is the language that those ones are speaking to whom you pitch. What other types of training needs or learnings might there still need to be considered?
Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Sorry, I'm kind of jumping on it.
Yes, go ahead.
Any typical thesis should by rights give you anywhere between 4 and 6 papers, because you're looking at different lenses, you're looking at different angles. To turn around and try and summarize your entire thesis into an article, so you're forcing, anywhere between 50 and 120,000 words into 6,000 or 7,000 words, it does not work. The number of times I see students or doctoral candidates that actually, in particular with the band conference, they'll try and put their entire thesis into a summary, into a paper, and then they get lost in it. So they end up creating so many questions trying to interpret what they're talking about. So pick only one section of your thesis. So for example, Jenny's got 3 research cycles in hers. Pick one of those research cycles and focus a paper around that. And then another one on your second cycle, another one on your third. So it's looking how they all interrelate. So did you want to add to that, Rodrigo?
Yes, again, it really depends, because in Europe, there's a lot more common to have article-based thesis. So on that, you already have your articles. Then what you do is you write an introduction, or in Swedish, they call it a kappa, but it's just an introductory chapter that you say, my introduction is this, my methods are this, and you keep it very, very short. So on that type of thesis, you already have your articles. Now, the one that Jacqueline was mentioning, probably Jen was mentioning, is like, okay, I've done a traditional monograph. How do I chop that down into parts that I can publish, but they are different and they're the same? And what I would recommend is that they can attend the workshop in January. But also as a tip that I would give is think about your introduction and your literature review kind of either one full paper. So that can work, especially if your literature review is quite broad and you're providing something new. And then you chop down some parts of the introduction, you take part of your methods, and if you have a lot of results, then you can have 2, 3, 4 papers out of that. So you have to use a lot of synthesis on your side, but remember that each paper has to contribute to knowledge. So that is the big question. How is my paper 1 differing from paper 2 and 3 and 4 or 5? In the case of my thesis, I did it on organizational change management for corporate sustainability. So the first paper was more of an overall perspective, saying, well, these are the different change management approaches, and this is a framework that I'll be proposing. The second one was on drivers to change. Then the third one was on barriers and strategies to overcome change. And the fifth one was on theories of the firm that had been part of my literature review. Then I removed, and then it was added on later on. So each of them were part of a whole, but different parts of a whole, and each would be contributing to knowledge.
And if you can layer the different sections, then because you're getting different articles, you can then cite your previous article and add to that as you go through. So you're getting that additional benefit.
Rodrigo, you said 10,000 articles per year your journal receives. Is that correct?
Received. I was in a journal that was really massive. It was crazy. I think now they're up to 15 or 20,000. But I quit that one some years ago. It was a rat race.
So you got sanity back.
Is it worthwhile to try getting into journals like that? And if so, what would be a good strategy?
In that particular journal, no, not anymore, because when I was there, we had average review date for the first revision 3 months, which was really good. Now they've gone up to 1 year for the first revision, and 1 year is too long for the first revision. I would say 3 to 6 months for first revision is fine. You don't want to go also to some of the open access journals that have a first revision in week, 2 weeks. That's also no. So somewhere around 3 months, it's okay. Do you want to go to those journals? I don't think the volume affects. I think it's more on the quality of the journal and the rate of review of the journal, rather than, look, if they have 20,000, 200,000, but the quality of the reviews is good and the rate of review is decent, so somewhere between 2 and 6 months, then that's fine. The volume for me is really not important.
Okay, Jack, if you compare that with them, what is your approach and experience?
Okay, well, I tend to try and target probably A and B rated journals, or the 3 and 4 star, because their feedback, although there's like an 85 to 90% rejection rate, their feedback is really positive. It gives you an indication of where you need to target and what you need to do to improve the article. So I've been able to get a couple published in, but they've also been very positive feedback to then review the article and then go to another journal. Practical based quite often are B and C or level 2 and 3 star, because they're practical based, so they're different type of journals. With the BAM, the conference papers, because they are a developmental paper, they're not journal standard yet. Brilliant opportunity for you to, particularly if you're going through your doctoral program, is put a paper into the BAM conference, or any conference for that matter, because you get that feedback, you get that understanding, okay, what am I missing or what can I add to improve that paper? So by the time you go to the conference, you're then presenting to the conference, you may have gone through 2 or 3 iterations. But again, you're getting the feedback to then improve that paper to get it to a journal standard. So that kind of works quite often. And quite often coming out of the different conferences is they may have a theme-based article, a theme-based journal coming up. And there's more chance of actually getting into that because it's theme-based and you've aligned to that theme as well. So, so it's certainly well worth looking at.
Okay. Rodrigo, you just yesterday told us that you recently have been running a workshop in Austria. What are your main outtakes from this workshop, or more generally the trainings that you provide?
Well, that workshop was the first that we've ever done, because I usually do article, how to write an article in the best way. So, but that one was just on writing articles. So it was much more a hands-on approach. And that was the first time that we run something like that. It was really great, quite exhausting. So the article the article writing workshop that I'll be doing in Portugal is more about going into the nitty-gritty of the things we've been talking about today. So what is the publishing context? How do we do those things? What is the cycle, for example, when you're doing your PhD thesis, you know that you have to hand it in to your supervisors, they check it, you hand it into the PhD school, blah, blah, blah. But how does it work in the journal world? So you send it to your editor, and the editor does what, and then what happens, and all of those things. Then we go into detail into every section that we talked about. So what is a good title? And we talked about it a little bit today. What is a bad title? How would you write an abstract? What should an introduction have? What should a literature review have? And what are the outcomes of a literature review? Same with the methods. We go in depth about the methods section. Same with the results, findings, discussion, conclusions, and when we run it on a bigger scale, so the 3 days rather than a 1 day, we also talk about different methods. So what is methodology? What is epistemology, ontology, research design, data analysis, data collection, limitations of the methods. We also, I'm also planning to do a discussion on how to find out if the paper is critical, realist, or positivistic, or a little bit on epistemology. And then towards the end, I think we had agreed that I could provide some editors' comments to some of the papers of the potential participants.
Thank you. So before we come to a closing and go off record, are there still any further questions to either Jacqueline or Rodrigo? Then, if not, some closing recommendations from Jacqueline and Rodrigo on the record on how to get into academic publishing and what perhaps to watch out in particular. Jacqueline.
I'll really take I'm going to take it slightly to the left field. The number of students, and guilty as well, that you hit a wall, you hit procrastination, you're staring at a blank page, you cannot focus. You know, as Rodrigo would let you know, writing is a very lonely venture. So having those 3-day events, etc., does make a huge difference, even the weekly support type thing. Getting rid of the distractions, you've got the online and the offline. There's different apps that block out things like your Facebook and those type of things. Offline, obviously, can control kids and whatnot to a certain degree or have time while they're at school or sleep. But it's that whole focus point, and being able to, even that 15-20 minute blocks does make a huge difference. So if you get that habit happening, that does make things a lot easier. But it's also understanding, okay, which journal you're going to target if you're going to do an article, or if your thesis, how your structure is. And getting that whole focus point and getting that time to physically work your way through and use your peers to give you that support does make a difference.
Okay.
So over to you, Rodrigo.
Yes, thank you. I would say that both for your PhD thesis, but also for an article, have an objective. So try to think, what is the message of your paper? What is the message of your thesis? And then you can work towards that. So sometimes you can print it and put it on top of your screen or have it there. And then you say, well, that's what I'm aiming for. And my literature review, my methods, my results need to point to that. Maybe it will change, but have that objective, have that I'm working towards that. And then the distractions might come, but then you're like, I still want to do that. That is the contribution to knowledge. And I say contribution to knowledge is quite broad, can be a theory, a method, a framework, whatever, but is that extra that you're providing to the academic knowledge that there is on a particular discipline. So that's what I would suggest.
We need to also incorporate, say, DBA, which is very practice-based. So you have your PhD with this contribution to knowledge. Within a DBA, it could be contribution to practice. So it is a contribution to knowledge, but it's a practice based on it. So it's just covering both of those.
All right. So let me then go off the record for questions, but still, first, thanks a lot for making yourself available today here, Jacqueline, Rodrigo. Much appreciated.